This is my opportunity to welcome you all to our webinar today. I'm Steve Larson of the editorial staff here at Horge Dairyman. Also with us today is Jim Baltz down at the University of Illinois, a co-worker of Mike Hutchins down there, who does a lot of the technology and behind-the-scenes work for our webinar series. Jim Baltz, it's good to have you with us again. Mike Hutchins often is a co-host and moderator on our webinars, and he is traveling today, so we won't be hearing from Mike, but I'm sure he's with us in spirit as well. But the main point today is to, again, as I welcome you to our webinar, it's actually being sponsored by Horge Dairyman and our various offerings. We have a new Intel newsletter, free newsletter that goes out every Monday morning, and for those of you who are interested in that, just check our website, give us a sign up with your email, and you'll be getting that Horge Dairyman Intel each week for developments on the new Farm Bill and a variety of other news topics as we hear about them. So with that, Scott Brown is our presenter today. Of course, he's going to be talking about the dairy provisions of the Farm Bill. Scott is a research assistant professor in the Department of Agriculture and Applied Econ down at the University of Missouri. And in this role, Scott has worked with the U.S. Congress over the past 2 decades, determining the quantitative effects of changes in dairy and livestock policies. And he's testified regarding dairy and livestock policy issues before both the House and Senate Ag committees. He's worked on the economic effects of industry-led programs such as CWT, cooperatives working together, and currently operate in the dairy industry. Scott is investigating the economic effects of the adoption of new technologies in the cattle industry that increase high-quality cattle supplies. Scott received his PhD in Ag Econ from the University of Missouri and his BS degree in Ag Business from Northwest Missouri State University. And he grew up on a diversified farm in Northwest Missouri. I've known Scott for a long time. I have a great deal of respect for him. And Scott, it's great to welcome you to this webinar. And with that, we'll let you get started.
Thank you very much, Steve. I appreciate the opportunity to visit with you all this afternoon about the new dairy provisions in the Farm Bill. I thought before I would start, though, I would at least give you a little more basketball information here at the University of Missouri. We were out a couple of days last week because of the weather, but now that the students are back on campus, there's been a lot of worry about whether we should be calling our basketball Tigers, in fact, the Tigers any longer. Students have been looking for alternative mascots, and last I knew in the poll, the Possums were winning. So Missouri Possums, for those that don't know, play dead at home and get killed on the road has kind of been the running joke of late. So enough on the basketball side. Again, I think it is great to have a chance to talk a little bit about the Farm Bill. It has been a long road. I think as we talk today, some of the things that we're going to discuss certainly are open for interpretation as we go forward. So I want to make certain that everybody thinks carefully about as we get USDA regulations what certainly might be changing as we look ahead. I applaud Congress for getting us to the end of this Farm Bill. For those that have been a part of it, I think it has been a very long journey with lots of twists and turns that we haven't really seen before for a number of farm bills. Certainly every farm bill has its own unique timing, but I really go one that frankly started with hearings as early as 2010. Has been a long process, and I think many of us wondered if the end would ever come. It was amazing once we got close to the end how quickly things happened, and in the last couple of weeks have really come to the finish line, and I go, a finish line for the dairy industry that is a very different policy than we've seen in the past. So it is nice to now really change gears and start talking about implementation. And I certainly remind everyone that it's important now to start thinking about how the industry interprets what we have in terms of farm programs, and how everyone in the industry can use the dairy provisions we have to the best interest of themselves. I always start, I go, this is really a fundamental change in dairy policy relative to where we've been in the past. I look back, and many of you remember National Milk's original efforts to talk about Foundation for the Future. I think when you look at what we ended up with, many of the original Foundation for the Future kinds of options were laying there. So we want producers to have a lot more flexibility in how they participate in the program, and we certainly have that with what the new Farm Bill has given us. I go with program flexibility, however, there's a lot of homework to be done. Exactly how do I want to sign up for the program? Do I want to sign up for the program? What level of margin coverage do I want? What quantity of my base production history do I want to ensure year by year? We just haven't had that amount of flexibility. I really go forever. Getting away from what was traditionally been a price support kind of program to one that's a margin support kind of program certainly goes to just how different or how fundamentally we've changed dairy policy. I think it's a great opportunity for risk management by dairy producers that they've never had in their toolbox before. MILC was certainly, and the Milk Income Loss Contract Program was a start of that back in the 2002 Farm Bill, where at least in MILC we started to talk about not only is it milk prices that matter, but it was also feed costs. MILC did have production caps, and you couldn't pick a margin level. So that's really the difference, I would say, between many of the risk management provisions we have in the new Farm Bill and MILC. Again, get a chance to provide a lot more flexibility. I certainly remind folks there has been a lot of discussion going on about dairy policy over the past 3 or 4 years in terms of what's there. I almost go, erase your knowledge prior to January 1st of 2014. Many of the things that we talked about, if it was the original Dairy Security Act, where we had base program, supplemental program, or it was the Goodlatte-Scott Amendment, I go, what we ended up with does have some of the flavor of all of that, all of those policy alternatives along the way. However, it has evolved. You really want to pay attention to those, to the final language in terms of how it's going to operate, and not think back to where we were in 2012 or 2013, because we did get some changes at the end that I think makes the program look different than where we've been. You know, I get a chance to talk to you today about the Farm Bill the Monday after President Obama signed it last Friday. It's nice to be as timely as we are today, but I will remind you that USDA has a lot of rulemaking that will need to be done in terms of the dairy provisions. Exactly that rulemaking process will be critical to the program operation. I'm probably going to say something at some point along the way today that will be a different interpretation than USDA sees from the legislative language. So there are going to be some changes that come along the way. So I will say, stay tuned. I go, this is chapter 1 of multiple chapters that I think we're going to see unfold as we get to the how does this really work for producers at the end of the day. So chapter 1 in the introduction, I really want to see where USDA starts to provide some rulemaking process for us so we can clearly define a few questions that might remain relative to the legislative language. Of course, USDA is going to certainly try to interpret the legislative language given congressional intent. So I think we know a lot of what's there, but to say that we're going to know exactly how USDA is going to interpret all of that legislative language, we're way too early in the process. And I think we're going to have a period of time before we get too much information from USDA. If I look at the major dairy provisions in the Agricultural Act of 2014, front and center, create a margin protection program. And I tend to use margin a lot in my vocabulary. I just remind you today that that's really the U.S. all milk price less feed cost, also at the national level as defined in the legislative language. So now instead of just protecting milk prices, we're going to protect this U.S. margin program, and producers can choose the level of that protection. Another added feature in the Agricultural Adjustment Act was the creation of a dairy product donation program. We'll talk more about that further on in the program, but another way I think when margins get exceptionally low that we could see the Secretary being able to use dairy product donations in a way that not only helps those low-income levels of population in the country, but also try to get us higher margins as well. We do talk about repealing the MILC program after the margin protection program is operational. In addition, repealing the current dairy product price support program. I'm not saying we're repealing permanent law when I say that, but certainly the current provisions of the dairy product price support program are now going to be gone. No longer will we also have the dairy export incentive program. The bill does in fact extend dairy forward pricing program as well, so producers will continue to have that as well as those in the industry to use the forward pricing program. USDA is required to begin the margin program no later than September 1st of 2014 according to the legislative language. I think that's going to make USDA work very hard and Farm Services Agency work very hard to get a margin program started much earlier than that September 1st deadline. They, however, do have the flexibility, if they have the program up and running, that it could start sooner than that. From a producer standpoint, I guess at this point in time, I will say that sign up for the program, you should be looking at that July, August 2014 time frame. Again, I think we're going to push very close to that deadline. I say we. I think USDA in trying to implement the provisions of the margin protection program will certainly be pushing up against that September 1st deadline. So it doesn't mean you can't be thinking about how you want to participate, but certainly want to be prepared when sign-up occurs to figure out how you want to participate in that program. I very simply remember that for $100 annual registration fee, you're going to be able to get $4 margin coverage each year of the Farm Bill. So $4 is free regardless of size, and that is the very bottom of the protection if you choose to participate in the margin program. The way that the program is going to operate, we're going to talk about making payments on a bi-monthly basis, and that bi-monthly basis is particular, so January, February, the first bi-monthly period, and will continue for the remaining 5 for each calendar year. So payments occur bi-monthly, not on a monthly basis as we look ahead. It is a national margin calculation. Again, it is the U.S. all milk price less fee costs. The formula is very straightforward. We're going to always go, those of us that are in the academic world are going to be providing you, and even in USDA, providing you on a very regular basis. Here's what that margin looks like on a month-by-month basis. Just to make sure, the milk, corn, and alfalfa prices will be reported in the agricultural prices report that we're going to get at the end of each month. So for example, at the end of February, we would be getting the January all milk price. That's the full month price. The only price that comes from somewhere other than ag prices will be the soybean meal price. It will be a Central Illinois quote that is kept by the Agricultural Marketing Service at USDA. And again, all milk price less, and then you see the coefficients in the little standout box there multiplied by corn, soybean, and alfalfa prices. It is a national margin. It is not you calculating an individual margin. You'll be paid based on that national margin. Last bullet on that slide, I think it is important to remember there's going to be some lag in information. Again, we're not going to know the January all milk price until the end of February. It is going to take USDA some time to process payments. If you were due a payment in that January-February time frame, that could certainly stretch to March or April before you might see that payment coming for that January-February period. So there will be some cash flow issues in terms of how those payments occur in front of us. I always like to start with just looking at that historical monthly U.S. margin, and I start by number one, reminding us that the program didn't operate over this period. So although these are the actual observations we got from 1997 through most of 2013, had we had a program like this operating, we might see a different path than what's here. You all see how tough 2009 and then again 2012 was in terms of low U.S. margins. I sometimes like to remind folks, if I look over this long period of time, average margins were certainly well above 850, 100. If you look over the 2009 and forward period, margins average much lower over that period of time. I really wonder as we move ahead what average margins look like in front of us. We certainly have seen a lot of positive news with what's going on in terms of trade, as well as it's frankly nice to see $4 corn for the first time in a few years. So feed costs have been down for a number of folks who have been buying feed, so the industry in the U.S. certainly looks much better than it has for a while. If those trends continue and we put another good crop in the bin this fall and international demand stays as strong as many of us might suggest, we may not see low margins like 2009 or 2012 for a period of time. But I certainly think the program that we're talking about provides a very firm floor for a number of producers that want to take advantage of a new risk management tool. I like to, well, so for a minute, I'd like to do the first poll question and see what the audience thinks the proportion of dairy producers that will actually participate in the margin program.
Well, it looks
Scott,
like people are voting.
Yes, they are. One thing that's interesting is this is it's a 5-year commitment. Is that right?
So they're going participate for the life of the farm bill. They'll be able to annually make a choice about the level of participation they would want to choose in terms of both the margin level and the coverage level.
Okay, so there is some flexibility there. I know people are a little leery about making 5-year or 2-year commitments, let alone 5, but there are some flexibility things. We're getting some good votes here. Let's see, on my, yeah, just a minute. Jim, how are we doing on the voting down there?
Yes, we're at 75%. We're going to close it and show it.
Okay, that's very good. All right, great.
Yeah, so I jump in and looks like we got about 40% of folks suggesting participation would be between 50 and 75%. Interesting choice relative to what many of us that were working on the program earlier on would have thought participation would be in a program like this. Not many, only 12% saying less than 25% of producers would participate. So again, I think early on, I always go, I as an economist, worry about these kinds of participation choices. I've seen other points in time, and I sometimes like to remind us of the acre program on the crop side, where I think as economists we thought there would be better participation from the '08 Farm Bill than we ended up with. but certainly a lot of folks on the call today, webinar today, would say it is similar. So I'd like to go ahead and move on. So this is my point, that I really hope that producers will calculate their own margin. I hear a lot from producers of, well, I don't think I'm going to participate in the program because my margin is just very different than this national margin. I might be a grazer, or I might be growing all my own crops. And I go, well, that may be true, but let's make sure that you as an individual producer calculate what your margin does. I'm really interested in the month-to-month movement in your own margin relative to the month-to-month movement in the U.S. margin. If your individual margin is at the low when the U.S. calculated margin's at the low, that means you're going to get the most support. So sometimes I'll talk about the higher the correlation between a producer's margin and the national margin, the better the safety net. To pinpoint what a cutoff should be about correlation, I'm not going to give you one. I think it comes down to an individual choice, but if you don't calculate your own margin and compare it to the national margin, how do you know what kind of safety net this might really look like? So I say take time to do the comparison. I don't care about the details of how you choose to calculate your own milk revenue or your own feed costs. I always say do whatever you think is best for your particular situation. Again, I want to make certain that as we think about what we passed in the Farm Bill, it's time to change the mentality to this is an insurance program. Think about it as a risk management tool, and I'm just not trying to maximize program benefits under the program. Use it to protect risk as best you can. And sorry, I get on the soapbox every now and again, but I think it is important for producers to think about this as a risk management tool. It shouldn't be their own risk management, only risk management tool they use, but I think a much stronger one. If I look back at 2009 and 2012, I think a program like this would have provided much better support for producers than what we ended up with. So a little bit of the details. Your producers will be assigned a production history. It will be their highest annual milk marketings during 2011, 2012, or 2013. That will set the base. From that point forward, USDA will adjust a producer's production history annually to reflect increases in U.S. milk production. An individual operation's marketing's growth won't matter in the adjustment to the production history. It's only what's happening from a U.S. level. There are provisions for new dairy operations to be assigned a production history. We can look at the volume of actual milk marketings over a few month period of time and extrapolate that to a yearly amount, or it can be estimated from their herd size. So there are ways to get new producers into the program. I just simply wanted to say, if I'm an operation that is assigned a 2 million pound production history and U.S. milk production grows by 2% annually, so I'm going to get some growth in terms of what might be covered in terms of production history, but it's a pretty modest growth unless we see substantially larger increases in U.S. milk production than the 2% I have assumed here. So some growth, but certainly not a lot of growth as we look ahead. So herein really lies the question for producers when you start thinking about it from a margin level. So do I want to protect $4 margin? Do I want to protect $8 margin? It really depends on the cost that you're willing to pay for that additional 50 cents in coverage. And first of all, let's talk about what we have here. So producers each year will have the opportunity to pick between $4 and $8 margin level coverage in 50-cent increments. The first 4 million pounds of production history sees a premium cost. So $4, you'll see that's sitting there at 0. If I wanted $4.50 coverage and I had a 4 million pound or less production history. It cost me a penny per hundredweight. You see the rest of those as you look down the column of first 4 million pounds. If I'm above 4 million pounds, I have higher premiums. And if I start getting in that 650 range, for example, if I'm above 4 million pounds, part of that will be assigned 29 cents a hundred in a premium. It's important to realize in both 2014 and 2015, the premium rates for the first 4 million pounds will be reduced by 25% at all levels except the $8 coverage level. It stays at the 47.5 cents. Again, on top of those premiums, a producer will have to pay that $100 annual administrative fees. As you want higher margin levels, you're going to pay higher premiums. So I'd like to start a poll question, and I'm going to do it in two parts if we can. We'll do the second one, I think, more quickly. But from what you know, I want you to answer what's the best margin level for less than 4 million pound producers to protect given those premium costs.
Okay, polls are open, and we're expecting a good turnout here. People can indicate what they think they might prefer, or for some of you consultants out there, what you think your clients might be doing or what you might advise them. And we're getting 61%, over two-thirds, or about two-thirds have voted now. We're getting right up there. And the voting is pretty quick, and it looks like there's going to be a clear winner here. But Jim, shall we cut her off? We got 70% voting.
Okay, there we go.
Yes, I think it. Yeah, so the 39% of you say between 550 and 650 is the best margin level coverage for those less than 4 million pounds. I am going to, before saying too much more about that, I just want to go ahead and go to the next poll question. So I'm trying to distinguish between those that are smaller producers and those that are larger producers. So if we can go ahead and open that poll, what do you think those that are going to produce more than 8 million pounds should take in terms of coverage?
Okay, here again, polls are open, and for those of you producers kind of thinking about what you might be wanting to protect, and those of you consultants and advisors, what you think you might be recommending to your clients or customers. Advisees out there, voting is good and fast, and looks like we're going to get a little different result than we did before. Scott will give you something to talk about here in just a minute. We have a few more. Let's give just a couple more seconds for the voting, and slow down now, Jim. I think we'll cut the polls off and show Scott the data and see what he says.
Yeah, so we certainly are in a situation where 39% of you said 4 to 550, so we've almost moved down one level in terms of the less than 4 million pound winner was certainly the 550 to 650 range. You're beginning to say those larger producers will likely not buy up quite as much coverage, and again, I think that's very much related to what we see in terms of premium costs. I will say, when I think about those smaller producers, and probably my question was not as fair as it should have been, but I see some pretty attractive margin levels for those smaller producers, even at higher than the 550 to 650 levels. Certainly, when you look at what they might pay for the first in 2014 and 2015. So I wanted to come back and look at it from a chart perspective. As economists, I always go, a picture's worth 1,000 words. Maybe this one clouds things completely, but I wanted to look at margins, and I'm really going to look at the above 4 million pounds. When I look at the orange bar that's the first 4 million pounds, those don't stick out quite as much to me, and we'll come back to those. But when I look at going from a 650 coverage level for above 4 million pounds to a $7 coverage level, first thing that jumps out at me is, do I want to pay a 54-cent additional premium for 50 cents more margin coverage? if any of you answer yes to that question, I have some insurance I'd like to sell you as well, because I'll certainly take that 4-cent gain and not have that risk all the time anyway. So I go, that premium, paying more in premium than you're actually going to get in coverage, I think probably doesn't make a lot of sense for most. Now, I will say, I'm not saying that the cutoff for above $4 million is $7. If I look from $650 to $750 coverage, so I want to jump an entire dollar in margin coverage, that premium's certainly not an additional dollar. It's a little less than $1. That's very costly for that additional dollar in coverage, but trying to make the point that as you go from margin level, particular margin level coverage to another 50-cent increment, it's really what's that premium cost you relative to the benefit. And again, even I look at all the way at $8 coverage for the first 4 million pounds, 47.5 cents to get me $8 coverage could look attractive in some years. So just a little bit of thought, and I really go, I think this is one where you're going to see some year-by-year changes depending on what folks think the market's going to do in terms of that level of margin coverage I might want to take. A year like 2014 where we started off very nicely in terms of margins, maybe you're willing to take a little more risk, but again, focusing this as an insurance product, every operation will have some degree of risk it can withstand in a given year. And if I can withstand a lot of risk in my operation, I may be willing to buy lower levels of coverage or no level of coverage. But if I have a higher risk operation, I may want to cover more of that margin protection as I look ahead. So it's not only the level of margin that I want to protect, it's the quantity of my production history that I also want to protect. So I get to pick between 25 and 90% in 5% increments that I'd like to cover. I go, this creates for me very interesting trade-offs between the coverage level that I want to choose and the coverage quantity that I want to choose. I may choose to increase coverage quantity at low cost margins and vice versa. So am I going to try to minimize the cost of the premium, or am I going to try to maximize the level of risk that I want to cover in a particular year? If I expect low margins, I probably want to take a high coverage level and quantity for that year. If I expect high margins ahead, do I want to reduce that coverage level? Do I want to reduce that coverage quantity? Do I want to do both or neither? Am I just going to stay fixed for the life of the Farm Bill? I think all of those choices are there. And if we go one more slide ahead, we can actually look at one more poll question and really trying to get, what do you think producers are going to do in terms of that annual adjustment in their margin program choice?
Okay, off and running with the voting here. What will producers adjust their program choices as time goes on? Interesting question, and a lot of it sounds like it's going to depend on how good a handle we have on our crop growing and feeding costs, Scott. So, maybe the first year or two people aren't going to be quite as comfortable estimating that information. As time goes on, maybe we'll know more, so that might be a factor.
Absolutely, and I certainly think as we put this program out there, it's important to educate about that producers do have choices annually, and those choices maybe should depend on what they see ahead in markets. I will take a minute while we're trying to finish this poll to remind everyone that I think you're going to find a lot of those of us in the academic world trying to provide you every year with calculators that help you think about the decision, not necessarily tell you the correct decision, but give you some things to think about as you pick those choices.
Very good. That's right. Okay, here's the results.
So we've got over half of you saying yes, producers will annually adjust both coverage level and coverage quantity. I guess I'm not overly surprised that's where a majority of you went. However, it's interesting that 26% suggests that producers will adjust the coverage level. So I'll change my margin coverage year by year, but that quantity, maybe I'm going to remain fixed. So that did win at number 2 with 26 of the folks voting for that. So we will see how flexible producers are. And again, I think, Steve, you're correct that the exact market situation that presents itself from year to year will in fact make a difference. Again, just to come back, how much risk can your operation afford? I go, as we move in this box to the upper right quadrant, gets you the most protection in terms of risk coverage, but certainly at the highest premium cost. The more coverage quantity that I want, and the higher the margin level that I want to cover, the more out-of-pocket I have in paying for that premium. So where producers move year by year in these different boxes, I think is going to be very interesting. If I think that we're in a reasonably good margin year, do I find myself in one of those gold boxes? And if so, is it that I choose to reduce my quantity, but I want to pick a higher margin in case we fall a little bit? Maybe I'm more apt to get a payment. I really focus on those 2 gold boxes going. I'm going to be really curious to watch those producer decisions and how many folks do go down to the red box. If I look at 2014 and I had a chance to sign up today, and right now it does look like we're going to have a pretty good year for 2014. Do I use other tools, futures markets perhaps, to lay off some risk and I buy down so I don't have nearly the cost? A lot of very interesting choices, and I go, we wanted flexibility in this margin program. I think that started from the very beginning, again, with Foundation for the Future. And I'll tell you what, producers have a lot of flexibility in choosing coverage level and coverage quantity on a year-by-year basis. One of the additions late, I think, in terms of what we got out of the Agricultural Adjustment Act, Agricultural Act of 2014, 120 days after the margin program begins, the Secretary must have operational this dairy product donation program. In some ways, some may think it's similar to the price support program. I would encourage you to think about it differently than that. Certainly when the margin is less than $4 for the preceding 2 months, the Secretary is supposed to make this program operational. Secretary purchases dairy products at prevailing market prices and distributes to public and private nonprofits assisting low-income households. Secretary is supposed to be asking what products many of these nonprofits are interested in providing to the low-income households. The Secretary does not take possession or hold stocks of these programs. It's only meant to be a program that purchases dairy products, again, to move to low-income households through public and private nonprofits. Program is suspended if after 3 months of operation, after margins move above $4, and then we have a couple of other triggers that depend on the margin level and where U.S. prices are relative to world prices. So 4 different switches that will turn off operation of the Dairy Product Donation Program. I think this is a program when margins fall below $4. Again, we could see a lot of nonprofits interested in some additional dairy products going out to low-income households, and perhaps as the Secretary purchases those programs, it helps us get some margin recovery. I ask a very simple question for the last, I believe, poll question that I have for today. And if my computer's gonna, I just asked, will the Dairy Product Donation Program distribute large quantities of dairy products when it operates?
Okay, will it? Dairy Product Distribution Program distribute quantities when it operates? That's an interesting question. And, it is a different program, as you pointed out. Scott, than the old price support program, which was in some respects sort of a cloud over markets.
Yeah, that certainly won't be the case, as the Secretary won't be holding any product under this program, so never have to worry about product coming back on the market, to the extent that maybe you could see some products going through these private or public nonprofits displacing commercial sales. We could have some issues, but certainly much less than we saw with the old dairy product price support program.
Okay. Very good. Let's see how we're doing on voting. I think we're about done there. Let's see what the results.
Yeah, so over half of you say it depends on how the Secretary is going to implement the program. I certainly look forward to seeing the regulations that USDA puts out, and we were very evenly split between yes and no, with a quarter of you saying yes and roughly a quarter of you saying no. So I think it is going to be interesting to watch as the Secretary tries to put together specific implementation rules related to this dairy product donation program. So certainly some regulations that I'm interested in. I think as I look at the language, some questions start to come up about, do I get payments on production history even if I don't produce that amount? I'm looking for a little more clarification in regulations. Exactly premium rates for those over 4 million pounds of production history. If I interpreted the legislation right now, I would say if I got 6 million pounds of production history, I would say I get 2/3 of that coverage at the low level and 1/3 at the higher level, even if I'm not covering all 6 million pounds. But I think that is open for some interpretation as well. And I know there'll be other things in terms of USDA interpretations that will make it different. So although I've tried to give you my best guess of what's going to happen, USDA regulations will certainly change that, I think, as we move ahead. So I summarize for a minute, and I haven't talked about participation by others and how that should affect your own individual choice, but it does matter. If we had this program operating back in 2009 and we had a large proportion of the industry that, let's say, had $6.50 or $7 coverage, I think the marketplace would have stayed lower for a longer period of time. So large participation means lower margins remain longer. If we had small participation in the program, more producers see the full market effects of those low margins, and we get market recovery happening more quickly. So do not think that your own participation is the only thing that you should be looking at in terms of how this program operates. There may be a tendency, if others are buying up coverage, you're going to want to think about also buying up as well, just to avoid being in a situation where your neighbor has lots of nice margin coverage and you have none. It will be the difference, I think, between surviving through low margin environments and not in some cases. So again, it does depend on the level of risk of that individual operation as well. I'm not saying everybody should buy up, but understand the risk your operation can absorb as you make your choice, and understand how everyone else participates should affect your own level of participation. This is a large change in dairy policy. I go fundamental change. I think this program is going to look much different than anything we've run in this program for a long period. Every operation is certainly unique. If I'm a very an operation that can't handle a lot of risk, I want to think very hard about increasing that coverage. With that, I think I'd like to stop and see if we have some questions as we try to wrap up the remainder of the webinar. Steve? Okay, Scott, thank you very much. Very nice presentation. Covered covered it very well, and we appreciate that. I'm going to make a couple of comments and announcements here, and then give you a chance to catch your breath, and we'll get on with some questions and discussion here in just a moment. So again, we want to thank you for your presentation, and of course, Words for being the sponsor today. And we should remind people that this webinar in a few days and all of the past webinars are available in our web
webinar archives, which is go to hordes.com and click on the webinar link there, and you can go back and listen to these again and take advantage of that at any time you want. Also, in a few days, many of you know that you'll be, from past experience, you'll be receiving a very short questionnaire that we'd like to have you respond to, a survey that helps us make sure that our webinar series is meeting your needs in the future. We appreciate your input and your response. Take a look at some of the questions we've received so far and sort of moderate this next portion of the webinar today. Abby, welcome aboard.
First question is, will the FSA offices be the ones that will administer all of these programs? And will they be able to offer advice to folks, or will they need someone like a crop advisor to still step in and give them advice on the programs?
Yeah, that'd be a very good question. So first of all, yes, all of the dairy provisions that we're talking about will happen with the FSA office. Some of you may liken this to crop insurance, where it's RMA, Risk Management Agency, that deals with crop insurance. We're still going to be going to the local FSA office for sign-up. In terms of help, I think FSA offices are going to provide you the opportunity to sign up, and you're going to have to look for some other options in terms of having an educational opportunity of how to sign up for the program. I think that, again, there's going to be a lot of academics that are going to be out there trying to provide simple spreadsheets that help you with the choice of sign up on a year-by-year basis. I remind all of you that none of us are good future milk price forecasters. I sometimes will remind folks that I'm really good. I'll say the price is somewhere between $12 and $22 a hundredweight in the U.S. Is my best guess. So I do know these calculators are going to be dependent upon how the markets actually turn out during the year. Crop prices are equally important, but you're going to have to look for some others, I think, to step in and provide some help in terms of how to sign up for the program. I can see a situation where at some points in time you're going to have folks that are going to recommend futures markets as perhaps a better option for reducing some risk, in other years where a program like this will benefit, and you'll find folks willing to provide some of that advice to you.
Great answer. The next question, do you foresee premium payments due at sign-up at the end of the year, or will they be spread out over the year?
Yep. So the Secretary is going to have some discretion in terms of implementation about when premiums are due. I expect there's actually going to be at least a couple of options for you. Some of you that want to pay up front, that's probably going to be an opportunity, but I also think that folks are going to realize in some cases that's a fairly large burden on cash flow to do that all in advance, and I suspect you're going to have some options available to pay those across the year. I wouldn't expect that you're going to be able to make a premium payment every month, for example, to stretch it out that long, but I do expect maybe half up front, half at the end as some options to spread those premium costs across the year a little better for you.
Great. Do you feel that their grants will be ready and available for producers for the software programs that will help them keep track of their financials and keep a better tab on their margins?
So I think you're going to have a lot of folks who are going to jump in this game. I will say that I believe in the Farm Bill there is some substantial dollars available for those to work on educational opportunities for producers, as well as these kind of calculators or tools that help us sign up. So yes, I think there's going to be a lot of money available right away out of the Farm Bill for this kind of educational activity. I would expect you're going to see some early information out fairly quickly from folks. Again, I just remind you, until we get final USDA regulations, even looking at those calculators, at least make certain you go back to look at them again once we get final regulations, as folks may have to make some adjustment to those calculators to best reflect what FSA is implementing.
Good. How will new startups that don't have a milk base handle the history, the production history that they need to participate in the margin insurance?
Yep, so a new operation is going to have two choices available to it. Number one, if they have a couple of months of actual production or marketing's history, it appears USDA will be willing to spread that out and turn that into an annual production history. If there's no marketing's history at all available, USDA, I believe, is going to be instructed to look at the number of cows in that herd and try to use average herd information to start that marketing's history for an individual producer. So those appear to be the two options for new producers to be able to be assigned a production base.
Good. We have a question asking about the distribution program that you mentioned, and they're wondering if that will be on national level or worldwide level.
I think that will be focused in terms of U.S. donation programs. I saw nowhere in the legislation the idea that we could talk about international donation programs occurring under that program, so I do think we will stay focused on the U.S.
We have a question about the premium prices that you showed that were written into the Farm Bill. And where did you come up with those numbers? Where did they come from?
Yeah, so I think that those premium costs really came from the Congressional Budget Office scoring of the alternative programs that were talked about as we came to down the road of passing a Farm Bill. Those premium costs certainly help offset the overall cost to the government of running different levels of margin protection. You know, when I look at them again, I think someone was looking carefully at what's the additional cost to me of another 50 cents of coverage, and you know, as that coverage level moved up, that additional cost goes up, whether I'm under 4 million or above 4 million.
Good.
Okay.
We have a few more here, Steve.
Okay. Let's take time for, yeah, we've got some time. Go ahead, Abby.
We have kind of a follow-up question, someone wondering if there will be changes in premiums based on the quantity percentage or just on the margin coverage.
Yeah, so right now those premium costs are fixed for the life of the Farm Bill. They do not change depending on the quantity that you choose to cover. I guess the only caveat I might add to that, if I'm above 6 million pounds, above 4 million pounds, I could have some adjustments in my net premium depending on how I cover. But those do stay fixed. Now, I say that, and if Congress had the appetite to write a 2015, a 2016, 2017 Farm Bill, they, of course, could choose to change those premium costs, but right now those are current law and meant to be in place for the life of the Farm Bill. And, you know, I guess I just add, given how long and tough of a road it was getting a 2014 Farm Bill to the finish line, I think the appetite to reopen the Farm Bill anytime soon might be a little less than otherwise might be the case. Of course, federal deficits and debt matter a lot, and those could be some things that if we start spending a lot of money on programs like this, that might attract the attention of those working on budgets.
Good. And just one more question here. What are your thoughts, Dr. Brown, on how the banks will use this in their loan processing when working with dairy producers?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I will say, as I've gone around the country the last 2 or 3 years talking about different versions of programs like this, you start talking to lenders and their ears certainly perk up very quickly. I think that this is as tough as 2009 and 2012 were for all market participants, including lenders. Many lenders now see this as a way to make sure they avoid the tough times of 2009 and 2012 again. So I do see a lot more lenders who, if they're looking at loans to these operations, may be looking at how producers choose to participate in the margin program before providing those kinds of loans. So I do think you're going to see more hand-in-hand of those that can't afford a lot of risk or have a lot of leverage out there, lenders requiring some participation in programs like this just to reduce the risk. And I turn this around and go, it may be an opportunity to get a lot more dollars back into the dairy industry that I think you've had a lot of lenders who've had some pretty tough experiences the last 4 or 5 years as well. I think we have an opportunity for the industry to grow as we look ahead, and anything that we can do to get more outside money to help us grow the industry that's needed, maybe that's not a bad price to pay.
Absolutely, Dr. Brown. I think that was a great way to wrap that up. Thanks to the audience for all the great questions and to you for the good answers. We'll turn it back to Steve to wrap up the webinar.
Okay, Scott, thank you, Abby. I want to thank you again, Scott Brown, University of Missouri, for an excellent presentation. Very well done and very timely, of course, as well. I should mention to those of you that are still with us that there will be, I think, 4 different items in the next issue of the magazine, the February 25 issue, that will relate to this topic, including a full-page feature article written by Scott Brown with some more details on the dairy provision, so you can be looking for that as well. We want to remind you again, our next webinar, March 10th, Gary Etzel, University of Wisconsin School of Veterinary Medicine, will be the presenter talking about cows and their calcium. And we also might mention that a big part of this analysis for this program will be our cropping and feed costs. And those of us here at Horge Dairyman are doing some research on typical average upper Midwest feed costs and some from the Northeast, so that we will try to help you get a handle on your costs with silage and hay, and the silages and hay and the homegrown feeds, as well, that you can join up with the purchased feed costs that you have to help estimate your costs each month, as you will need to do. Again, our thanks to Jim Baltz down at the University of Illinois, our partner down there. We appreciate your help behind the scenes, and again, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to having you with us on future webinars. March 10, Cows and Their Calcium, April 14th, Animal Welfare, Dan Wary at the University of British Columbia. So thanks again for joining us, and that's it for today.